If everybody just did what they were good at, then we would have an efficient global economy. There would be no waste. There would be no crappy English wines on the market that would be wasting English energies in making something they're just not good at. If we were all productively efficient, then we wouldn't be paying American workers who get paid $25 an hour to put together Barbie dolls, when in fact we could pay those Chinese workers, and as we heard, they want these jobs, at 50 cents an hour. That lowers the cost, it increases supply, it lowers the price, and we increase consumption. What this then leads to, as Adam Smith envisioned it in The Wealth of Nations, is a universal division of labor. If each country, or if each firm was to specialize in what it was good at, and didn't pretend that they could make everything, then we would have a nice global division of labor facilitated by trade. And moreover, we would be facilitated by free trade. We need the maximal efficient trading of these goods and services so that I can get those chemical products from Saudi Arabia over to the manufacturing plants in China and then shipped over to the United States to be retailed and sold for $20 a pop. We want free trade in order then to have productive efficiency. For Adam Smith, this was the solution. This was the solution in the sense that everyone would benefit. Everyone would gain. The only way in which you wouldn't benefit is if you try to do something stupid and make something you're not good at making. But if everyone did what they were good at doing, and you traded with minimal barriers, i.e. free trade, then everyone would benefit. So as David Ricardo writes, a disciple of Adam Smith, under a system of perfectly free commerce, free trade, each country naturally devotes its capital and labor to such employments as are most beneficial to each. Naturally, right? What you're naturally good at, you will devote your labor and capital to. This pursuit of individual advantage is admirably connected with the universal good of the whole. What Ricardo is arguing here is that this global division of labor is natural. It is a function of the invisible hand. It is a function of nature. And he is warning, don't tamper with what is natural. Don't mess around with the advantages that God has given you. Specialize in those advantages that God has given you. This is not only natural, but it's also rational. If only the world's economic producers behaved rationally, Ricardo would say, then we would have the rational capitalist epoch. And I have to stress, for Ricardo and Smith, capitalism is not a bad word. Capitalism is the source of universal goodness. If people only practiced capitalism truly and honestly and efficiently, then everyone would benefit, according to Smith and Ricardo. If you allow the invisible hand of the market to do its work, then everyone will benefit. You just have to be rational. Now, I want to stress that even though Smith and Ricardo would say, look, this is just economic theory. We're not purporting to a certain world order. We're not saying that this is the way in which the world should be. We're just simply saying that this is how efficient markets work, and if we want everybody to be prosperous, if we want everybody to be rich, then we should allow the invisible hand of the market rule. But we do know that for people like Smith and Ricardo was not just economic theory, but this really was a political theory. It was not just a cosmo-economic vision, it really was a cosmo-political vision. It was a normative vision, and indeed it was a normative vision that had very distinct views on the role of government. As Adam Smith writes, Most of the state regulations for the promotion of public prosperity are unnecessary. In other words, most of government interventions for the promotion of public prosperity, in other words, national wealth, are unnecessary. And a nation, in order to be transformed from the lowest state of barbarism, by which Smith refers to the rest of the world that is not English, into a state of the highest possible prosperity, which in the late 18th century was England, needs nothing but bearable taxation, i.e. minimal taxation, fair administration of justice, in other words, the enforcement of laws, and peace. That was Adam Smith's political view. The economic view is let the invisible hand of the market reign. The political view is to let the invisible hand of the market reign, you must not let government interfere. So for Adam Smith then, his cosmopolitical vision, or what List refers to as Smith's cosmopolitical vision, is that there should not be government intervention. And for those of you who read the Conrad Black piece from this past weekend, you can see he is parroting exactly what Adam Smith is saying. Government intervention distorts the natural market. Government intervention, if you want to get philosophical, distorts the natural order of things. The second implication of Smith's cosmopolitical view or vision is that for him, the real focus is on individuals, not nations. Now, of course, it's easy to say when he is English and writing about England being in the highest state of prosperity and the highest order of civilization and so on, but really, in his heart of hearts, he is not writing about nations. He is writing about individuals. Nationalities, as far as Smith is concerned, does not matter. It's really about liberal individualism. So if one goes back to the textiles versus wines, it's not that it's Portuguese wine or that it's English textiles. It's just textiles that happen to be made in England that are better. Or wine that happens to be made in winemaking regions in Southern Europe, which just happens to be Portuguese. But for Smith, these nationalities don't matter. What really matters for Smith are individuals. Countries don't matter. As long as individuals behave rationally, then we will achieve this universal equilibrium, we will achieve peace and prosperity. So for Smith, he really is concerned about excessive government intervention. He really is concerned that excessive government intervention makes this all about countries and not what it should be about, which is individuals. And if we just ignore governments then, and just let markets do what markets do best, then all individuals, regardless if you're English or Portuguese or Chinese or whatever, will prosper. So for Smith and Ricardo, and adherence to that cosmopolitical view, which is a very compelling one, for people like them, markets are positive sum. Everyone benefits. And if you allow markets to function efficiently, then everyone, as individuals, will benefit. So then this asks or begets the question, can markets be manipulated? What the hell is Smith talking about? What is he so worried about? Well, obviously, markets can be manipulated. But the question that we ought to be concerned with, and the question we are concerned with in political economy is, should markets be manipulated? And again, if you go and you take a look at that Conrad Black commentary, it captures precisely this debate. Should governments intervene in the efficient workings of the market? Adam Smith obviously says no. Markets should not be manipulated. That market rationality is natural. As I just explained it to you, when prices are cheaper, of course you're going to buy more. It's natural. If we can increase supply and we take advantage of economies of scale, then of course we're going to lower the cost. And if we lower the cost, then we're going to lower the price. And if we lower the price, then of course you're going to buy more. Government intervention, on the other hand, leads to market distortions. And for Smith, then, as soon as governments intervene excessively in the functioning of markets, what was once this fantastic positive-sum game becomes a negative-sum game. Because you're distorting the natural efficiency of markets. Friedrich List and Alexander Hamilton, whom you read this week, and if you read them, you probably had trouble making sense of them, as we all do. Friedrich List, a German, and Alexander Hamilton, an American, say yes, markets should be manipulated. That there is a role for the visible hand of government. And that for national power, markets should and indeed can be manipulated. You see, you have to understand Friedrich List. Friedrich List was a German nationalist. And basically in his essay, what he is arguing is that Smith, as smart as Adam Smith is, as sound as his logic is, for Friedrich List, Adam Smith is naive. For Friedrich List, what he wants to argue is that the world is not positive-sum. And if anyone believes the world is positive-sum like Adam Smith does, then they're being naive. That in fact, no matter what Adam Smith says, nations matter. That it's never just about individuals. It's not just about the winemaker who incidentally happens to be Portuguese or the textiles manufacturer who happens to be English. For Friedrich List, nations matter. It matters if you are an English manufacturer, or a French manufacturer, or a Dutch manufacturer. In other words, one can think of Friedrich List, if you will, as a realist. Going back to IR theory from the first semester, Friedrich List is a realist. He's an economic realist, where it's not about liberal individualism, but at the core of his theory, it's about nation-states. And if you recall, what is realism after all? Realism is about nation-states and national power. So for List, it's not about individuals. It fundamentally is about countries. So Friedrich is very, very angry. And in his essay of 1841, which you read, the essay on political economy, which was written 65 years after Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, he basically writes the following. If Adam Smith, and all his naivety is to be believed, and if Adam Smith's influence is to be allowed to run amok, then this would happen. All England would thus be developed into one immense manufacturing city. Right? Because according to Smith, you make what you're good at. So if Adam Smith is to be believed, then all of England would thus be developed into one immense manufacturing city. You read this section this week. By this arrangement, it would fall to the lot of France, poor France, together with Spain and Portugal, to supply this English world with the choicest of wines. Right? In other words, if Adam Smith has his way, then the English are going to make all the really good manufactured stuff. They're the ones who are going to have all the industry. And the French and the Spanish and the Portuguese would be left with basically providing for the English wine. Germany would scarcely have more to supply this English world with than children's toys, wooden clocks, and philological writings. In other words, List is pissed, right? He's basically saying, if Adam Smith is to be believed, then England will be the industrial center of the world, and the rest of us will provide for England all of these other things of less value. Wine, wooden clocks, wooden shoes, and philological writings. What this quote points to, in a very roundabout way, is that, according to List, Smith is not value neutral. Adam Smith wants to argue, according to List, that look, I'm not pro-England. It just so happens we're good at making textiles. And we're good at manufacturing industrial goods. And it just so happens that you're not very good at it. You know, I don't mean to be offensive, is what Adam Smith is saying. List is saying, no, actually, Adam Smith, what you are presenting is the English hegemonic view. Of course, Adam Smith, you're going to believe that we should all do what we're good at because you happen to be in the most dominant position. You happen to be making the most lucrative manufactured goods. And you've consigned the rest of us to basically make your wine. So what List is arguing then is that of course Adam Smith wants free trade. Because ultimately, free trade benefits England. No matter what Adam Smith says, oh, it's not about countries, it's just about individuals. No, for List, free trade benefits England. And it denies others, and specifically, it denies other nations, therefore, then the ability to rise. That these other nations, the Spains, the Portugals, the Frances, never mind the countries in the developing world as it is today, would forever be consigned to the economic margins of the global economy. In other words, then, for List, what he's presenting, in contradistinction to Smith, is a German nationalist perspective. He is about the nation. He is about Germany getting the riot of the deal and England benefiting from this arrangement. Now, just so you know, this is not just a German view. This is not just a continental European, Germanic view of the events going on the continent at the time. This view is in fact shared by, if you can believe it, the country that today is most pro-free trade was the country in the 18th century that held to this Germanic view and captured in the works of Alexander Hamilton. Now, when one reads Alexander Hamilton, one has to appreciate the context in which he's writing. So, like List, he is in many ways responding to Smith. Hamilton was writing just after the American Revolution in 1776. And it was an American Revolution against the English. So, feelings towards England are a little suspicious at this time. Right? The Americans just fought this Revolutionary War to break free from England. There is a great deal of suspicion on the part of Americans in the New World vis-a-vis the Old World, England. And also, one must also remember that in the late 18th century, America's economy was a backwards economy. It was not an industrial powerhouse. It was far from an industrial powerhouse. The American economy at the time was an agricultural economy. It had no industry at all. So, when Alexander Hamilton writes in 1791, he writes, in such a position of things, meaning as they stand now, the United States cannot exchange with Europe on equal terms. And the want of reciprocity, right? The want of reciprocity is Adam Smith's notion of free trade. The want of reciprocity would render the United States the victim of a system which should induce them to confine their views to agriculture and refrain from manufacturing. So what's Hamilton saying here? He's basically saying, if you think about it, the exact same thing that List was saying. This idea of free trade that Adam Smith is propagating is a raw deal for anyone who's not English, especially for the Americans. And in fact, if one was to listen to Adam Smith, America should never engage in industrial manufacturing and should just keep farming. Right? Because Adam Smith says, do what you're good at. Don't venture into things you're not good at. Well, America's not good at industrial manufacturing in the late 18th century. And Alexander Hamilton's saying, if Adam Smith is to be believed, then we're just going to be farmers forever. And we're never going to be able to engage in industrial manufacturing. Hamilton, being a great American nationalist, knows that America cannot depend on agriculture forever. That if it were to depend on agriculture forever, it would simply be supplying food to the English. And therefore, what America needs is industry. It needs manufacturing industry. It needs national power, and it needs the ability to be self-reliant. And for people like Hamilton, he is worried that if Adam Smith is to be believed, that would be impossible. It's this impulse that List and Hamilton convey. It's this impulse that this idea of free trade benefiting everybody and benefiting individuals is a sham that leads to the rise of what we call mercantilism. Mercantilism is a political economic theory that in many ways is a direct response to Smith. It is a direct response to Smith and the notion of the invisible hand of the market. First, it's a political response to Adam Smith's notion of universalism. Adam Smith continues to contend, look, don't worry about politics. Take the government out. Let markets run efficiently and naturally and everyone will benefit. Well, what List and Hamilton are offering is actually a political response, basically saying, no, it's not just economics, that there is a politics around this. And that in many ways, the politics is anchored in the nation state. The Smithian notion that, oh, it doesn't matter if you're English or you're Portuguese, that's a sham. It does matter if you're English. It does matter if you're Portuguese or German, or in the case of Alexander Hamilton, American. Which then means that mercantilism, if you think about it, is a political economic theory of economic nationalism. It presumes that the international system, if left unfettered, is inherently unfair. That Adam Smith is basically trying to sell you a bill of goods if he is trying to argue that, oh, don't worry, the world is indifferent, it's value neutral, everybody has a chance to thrive. No. For mercantilists, they believe that the international system is inherently unfair and that it's not a positive sum world, that in fact it's a zero-sum world. That my gain is your loss, and your gain is my loss, and that my country, therefore, is in competition with your country. And therefore, for my country to be competitive with your country, we need to be able to not only feed ourselves, but we need to be able to make things. We need to be able to make our own machines. We need to be able to make our own manufactured textiles, and so on. Which then leads to the fourth characteristic of mercantilism, which is that advantage is not God-given and static. That advantage and comparative advantage is in fact dynamic. That today you may not be very good at making textiles, but that shouldn't preclude you from 50 years from now being really good at making textiles. Or that if today you're not very good at making wine, that shouldn't preclude you from 50 years from now from making good wine. So advantage is not static, it's not absolute, it's not just what you were given at the beginning of time and that's all you've got. Right? For mercantilists, no, it's about dynamic comparative advantage. We can create our own comparative advantages. We may not be good at making wine today, as Ontario once said, but we may be good at making wine eventually, as Ontario says today. But we have to make those comparative advantages, which requires then the last variable or factor, and that is the visible hand of the government. That if we want to make comparative advantage, if we believe comparative advantage is dynamic, then we need government intervention. Because government intervention, and this is just fancy economics speak, can alter prices. It can distort the market in advantageous ways. That indeed, if we were to be left with only the advantages that we were born with, then yes, Ontario should never be making wine. But through government interventions, like the invention of the VQA or subsidies for ice wines and so on, through those government interventions, we can create comparative advantages in winemaking. Any questions before we move on? So you can see I've taken us through the story of Smith, angry Friedrich, worried Hamilton, to this spot now where we can talk about mercantilism. Any questions or clarification before we move on? Yeah?